Hey 5B, right, sorry 5A, I'm going to carry on reading from chapter 5 of Howl's Moving Castle. You can find a link to the book in the description below, and this starts at the bottom of page 21. So this is chapter 5, which is far too full of washing. The only thing to do, Sophie decided, was to show Howl that she was an excellent cleaning lady, a real treasure. She tied an old rag around her wispy white hair. She rolled her sleeves up her skinny old arms and wrapped a tablecloth from the broom cupboard round her as an apron. It was rather a relief to think that there were only 4 rooms to clean instead of a whole castle. She grabbed up a bucket and got to work. "What are you doing?" cried Michael and Calcifer in a horrified chorus. "Cleaning up," Sophie replied firmly. "This place is a disgrace." Calcifer said, "It doesn't need it." And Michael muttered, "Howl will kick you out." But Sophie ignored them both. Dust flew in clouds. In the midst of it, there came another great set of thumps at the door. Calcifer blazed up, calling, "Port Haven door!" and gave a great sizzling sneeze, which shot purple sparks through the dust clouds. Michael left the workbench and went to the door. Sophie peered through the dust she was raising and saw that this time Michael turned the square knob over the door, so the sign with the blue blob of paint on it was downwards. Then he opened the door onto the street she saw out of the window. A small girl stood there. "Please, Mr. Fisher," she said, "I've come for that spell for me mum." "Safety spell for your dad's boat, wasn't it?" Michael said. "Won't be a moment." He went back to the bench and measured powder from a jar from the shelves into a square of paper. While he was doing it, the little girl peered in at Sophie, as curiously as Sophie peered out at her. Michael twisted the paper round the powder and came back saying, "Tell her to sprinkle it right along the boat. It'll last out and back, even if there's a storm." The girl took the paper and passed over a coin. "Has a sorcerer got a witch working for him too?" she asked. "No," said Michael. "Meaning me?" Sophie called. "Oh yes, my child, I'm the best and cleanest witch in Ingaray." Michael shut the door, looking exasperated. "That will be all around Port Haven now. Howl may not like that." He turned the door green down again. Sophie cackled to herself a little, quite unrepentant. Probably she'd let the besom she was using put ideas into her head. But it might persuade Howl to let her stay if everything thought she was working for him. Do you know, I've got no idea what a besom is. I'm going to look that up while we're here. Ah, there you go. Yeah, it's a broom. It's like, you know, those brooms like you see a witch flies on with sticks tied around the end. There you go. You learn something every day. Right. Probably she'd let the besom she was using into her head. But it might persuade Howl to let her stay if everyone thought she was working for him. As a girl, Sophie would have shriveled with embarrassment at the way she was behaving. As an old woman, she didn't mind what she did or said. She found that a great relief. She went nosily over as Michael lifted up a stone in the hearth and found the little girl's coin underneath it. "What are you doing?" "Calcifer and I try to keep a store of money," Michael said rather guiltily. "Howl spends every penny we've got if we don't." "Feckless spendthrift," Calcifer cackled. "He'll spend the king's money faster than I burn a log. No sense." Sophie sprinkled water from the sink to lay the dust, which made Calcifer shrink back against the chimney. Then she swept the floor all over again. She swept her way towards the door in order to have a look at the square knob above it. The fourth side, which she hadn't seen used yet, had a blob of black paint on it. Wondering where that led to, Sophie began briskly sweeping the cobwebs off the beams. Michael moaned and Calcifer sneezed again. Howl came out of the bathroom just then in a waft of steamy perfume. He looked marvellously spruce. Even the silver inlets and embroidery on his suit seemed to have become brighter. He took one look in and back into the bathroom again with a blue and silver sleeve protecting his head. "Stop it, woman," he said. "Leave those poor spiders alone." "These cobwebs are a disgrace," Sophie declared, fetching them down in bundles. "Then get them down and leave the spiders," said Howl. Probably he had some kind of wicked affinity with spiders, Sophie thought. They'll only make more webs, she said. And kill flies, which is very useful, said Howl. Keep that broom still while I cross my own room, please. Sophie leaned on the broom and watched Howl cross the room and pick up his guitar. As he put his hand on the door lap, she said, If the red blob leads to Kingsbury and the blue blob goes to Port Haven, where does the black blob take you? What a nosy old woman you are, said Howl. That leads to my private bolt hole, and you're not being told where it is. He opened the door onto the wide, moving moorland and hills. When will you be back, Howl? Michael asked a little despairingly. Howl pretended not to hear. He said to Sophie, You're not to kill a single spider while I'm away, and the door slammed behind him. Michael looked meaningly at Calcifer and sighed. Calcifer crackled with malicious laughter. Since nobody explained where Howl had gone, Sophie conceded he was off to hunt young girls again, and got down to work with more righteous vigour than ever. She did not dare harm any spiders after what Howl had said, so she banged at the beams with the broom, screaming, Out, spiders! Out of my way! Spiders scrambled for their lives every which way, and webs fell in swathes. Then, of course, she had to sweep the floor again. After that, she got down on her knees and scrubbed it. I wish you'd stop, Michael said, sitting on the stairs out of her way. Calcifer, cowering at the back of the gate, muttered, I'd never made that bargain with you now. Sophie scrubbed on vigorously. You'll be happier when it's all nice and clean, she said. Well, I'm miserable now, Michael protested. Howl did not come back again until late that night. By that time, Sophie had swept and scrubbed herself into a state when she could hardly move. She was sitting hunched up in the chair, aching all over. Michael took hold of Howl by a trailing sleeve and towed him over to the bathroom, where Sophie could hear him pouring out complaints in a passionate mutter. Phrases like terrible old biddy and won't listen to a word were quite easy to hear, even though Calcifer was roaring, Howl, stop her, she's killing us both! But all Howl said, when Michael let go of him, was, Did you kill any spiders? Of course not, Sophie snapped. Her aches made her irritable. They look at me and they run for their lives. What are they? All the girls whose hearts you ate? Howl laughed. No, just simple spiders, he said, and went dreamily away upstairs. Michael sighed. He went into the broom cupboard until he found an old folding bed, a straw mattress and some rugs, which he put into the arched space under the stairs. You'd better sleep here tonight, he told Sophie. Does that mean Howl's going to let me stay? Sophie asked. I don't know, said Michael irritably. Howl never commits himself to anything. I was here 6 months before he seemed to notice I was living here and made me his apprentice. I just thought bed would be better than the chair. Thank you very much, Sophie said gratefully. The bed was indeed more comfortable than a chair, and when Calcifer complained he was hungry in the night, it was an easy matter for Sophie to creak her way out and give him another log. In the days that followed, Sophie cleaned her way remorselessly through the castle. She really enjoyed herself. Telling herself she was looking for clues, she washed the window, she cleaned out the oozing sink, and she'd made Michael clear everything off the workbench and the shelves so she could scrub them. She had everything out of the cupboards and down from the beams and cleaned those too. The human skull, she fancied, began to look as long-suffering as Michael. It had been moved so often. Then she tacked an old sheet to the beams nearest the fireplace and forced Calcifer to bend his head down while she swept the chimney. Calcifer hated that. He crackled with mean laughter when Sophie discovered that soot had got all over the room and she had to clean it all again. That was Sophie's trouble. She was remorseless, but she lacked method. But there was a method to her remorselessness. She calculated she could not clean this thoroughly without sooner or later coming across Howl's hidden hoard of girls' souls or chewed-up hearts, or else something that explained Calcifer's contract. Up by the chimney, guarded by Calcifer, had struck her as a good hiding place, but there was nothing up there but quantities of soot, which Sophie stored in bags in the yard. The yard was high on her list of hiding places. Every time Howl came in, Michael and Calcifer complained loudly about Sophie, but Howl didn't seem to attend. Nor did he seem to notice the cleanliness, and nor did he notice the food closet became very well stocked with cakes and jam and the occasional lettuce. For, as Michael had prophesied, word had gone around Port Haven. People came to the door to look at Sophie. They called her Mrs. Witch in Port Haven and Madam Sorceress in Kingsbury. Though the people who came to the Kingsbury door were better dressed than those in Port Haven, no one in either place liked to call on someone so powerful without an excuse. So Sophie was always having to pause in her work to nod and smile and take in a gift, or to get Michael to put up a quick spell for someone. Some of the gifts were nice things: pictures, strings of shells, useful aprons. Sophie used the aprons daily and hung the shells and pictures round her cubbyhole under the stairs, which soon began to look very home-like indeed. Sophie knew she would miss this when Howl turned her out. She became more and more afraid that he would. She knew he could not go on ignoring her forever. She cleaned the bathroom next. That took her days, because Howl spent so long in it every day before he went out. As soon as he went, leaving it full of steam and scented spells, Sophie moved in. "Now we'll see about that contract," she muttered at the bath. But her main target was, of course, the shelf of packets, jars and tubes. She took every one of them down, on the pretext of scrubbing the shelf, and spent most of the day going carefully through them to see if the ones labelled skin, eyes and hair were in fact pieces of girl. As far as she could tell, they were all just creams for powders and paint. If they once had been girls, then Sophie thought Howl had used the tube for decay on them and rotted them down the wash basin too thoroughly to recall. But she hoped they were only cosmetics in the packets. "Girls!" I know. Kan du være litt stillere? Right. She put the things back on the shelf and scrubbed. That night, as she sat aching in the chair, Calcifer grumbled that he had drained one hot spring dry for her. "Where are these hot springs?" Sophie asked. She was curious about everything these days. "Under the Port Haven marshes mostly," Calcifer said. "But if you go on like this, I'll have to fetch water from the waste. When are you going to stop cleaning and find out how to break my contract?" "In good time," said Sophie. "How can I get the terms out of Howl if he's never in? Is he always away this much?" "Only when he's after a lady," Calcifer said. When the bathroom was clean and gleaming, Sophie scrubbed the stairs and the landing upstairs. Then she moved into Michael's small front room. Michael, who by this time seemed to be accepting Sophie gloomily as a sort of natural disaster, gave a yell of dismay and pounded upstairs to rescue his most treasured possessions. They were in an old box under his worm-eaten little bed. As he hurried the box protectively away, Sophie glanced a blue ribbon and a sugar-spun rose in it, on top of what seemed to be letters.